The most consequential casualty of the recent confirmation battle is not Christine Blasey Ford or Brett Kavanaugh. It is the Supreme Court and thus American democracy. The court was one of the last bastions in Washington that towered above the political fray. It's now part of the dysfunction that has overwhelmed almost the entire American political system. When I wrote a book about illiberal democracy 15 years ago, I noted that America was not immune to the dangers of a populism that could erode liberal democracy. What saved the country were the many checks and balances on pure majority rule, from the Bill of Rights to the Senate to the judicial system. I was struck that in surveys, the three governmental institutions that commanded the most respect were, ironically, all fundamentally non-democratic: the armed forces, the Federal Reserve, and the Supreme Court. Of these, the Supreme Court was perhaps the most important because it is the ultimate arbiter of American democracy. Aristotle believed that the best political system was a mixed regime, one that had aspects of democracy but also gained stability from some bodies that, rather than pandering to public sentiment, took a longer view and obeyed a higher set of values. Over the years, such institutions in the U.S. have faced ferocious challenges. 2 long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have tested the reputation of the military. The speculative bubbles that led to the global financial crisis made many question the vaunted wisdom of the Fed. But both institutions have weathered those storms, perhaps because they were viewed to be genuinely trying their best and functioning as intended. Whatever mistakes they made were honest errors, often corrected. The same cannot be said of the Supreme Court. Perhaps it began in 2000 with the highly political case of Bush v. Gore, in which conservatives on the court suddenly abandoned their long-standing principle of deference to states' rights and voted in a nakedly partisan fashion. Some would date it back even further to 1987, when the left mounted a fierce campaign against Robert Bork and derailed his nomination. Whatever the best starting date, the court has lost its credibility. Over the last several decades, Americans' confidence in the court has gone from a peak of 56% in the 1980s to just 37% today. It is likely to go even lower after the whole Kavanaugh mess. Both parties are to blame for this descent, but the Republican Party, especially after the Gingrich Revolution of 1994, is by far the prime mover. It shifted further to the right, initiated the tactics of treating political opponents as traitors, and actively encouraged the incendiary language that now dominates our discourse. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's refusal in 2016 to fulfill his constitutional obligation to give Judge Merrick Garland consideration for the Supreme Court was simply the most egregious example of a strategy that had been pursued for years. The Democrats, for their part, have responded by mirroring these Republican tactics. For American democracy to work, all the elements, the branches of government, the political parties, the states, and the center must find a way to work together. And what makes that kind of cooperation possible is the sense that there are some institutions, some rules, some norms that cannot be thrown into the maelstrom of party politics. And chief among those institutions is the Supreme Court, or it was.